It's smoky, juicy, tender. It's a tri-tip. And while this might be an unconventional way to cook a tri-tip, it's become pretty popular. I wanted to walk you through the steps, and I'm gonna pull out all the stops how I normally cook a brisket and treat the tri-tip just like that. So you're gonna need a few things. Obviously, you're gonna need a tri-tip. I wanted to get a choice tri-tip because it's probably the most common that you're gonna find at the stores. I don't wanna try to trick y'all and convince you how awesome it is by using like a Wagyu tri-tip or something. So we've got a choice. I got this at Costco. And then you're gonna need some kind of a seasoning. So I'm gonna be using Canyon Crust, which is my beef rub. It's gonna give you that great dark bark on the outside. Now, if you want to use a binder, you can. However, as you can see, I prefer to do a dry brine. So I'm gonna season this ahead of time, at least by a couple hours up to overnight, and that's gonna give an overall better crust and a really good deep penetration of flavor. And the last couple things you'll need, you don't need this to start off, but you will need some melted beef tallow. Now, I've rendered this down from previous briskets. I always have it on hand in the fridge for moments like this. And last, you're gonna need a little bit of butcher paper. This is for that final wrap that allows us to pour that beef tallow on so we can push through the end of that cook, get it nice and moist.
That's what she said.
Now, to save time so that we can start cooking, I went ahead and dry brined another tri-tip that's been sitting in the fridge for a few hours. So let me do some magic swapping here. Ta-da! All right, so we've got a seasoned tri-tip. So I just seasoned this with my Canyon Crust. Now, if you don't have time to dry brine, go ahead and just put some mustard on if you wanted to, or sprinkle it on, but I'd let it hang out while the smoker heats up. Now, speaking of a smoker, I am gonna cook at 250 degrees. I've got my smoker warming up right now. That's typically what I cook all my briskets at, so I wanted to do it very similar. Now, the good news is, this isn't an overnight cook, it's a lot faster. This is about a 2.5 pound tri-tip, so it's not gonna demand as much time. All right, let's check on the smoker and get this guy in there. Okay, so we've got the pit at 250. We're all ready to go. I'm gonna go ahead and put the tri-tip in, and it's a little warmer on this side of my smoker, so I'm gonna put the thicker part in there. And then we're gonna just let this hang out here for a couple hours. We'll come back, I'll time it for you. Nighty night. All right, it's been about 2.5 hours. Ooh, that looks good. It's crazy to see a tri-tip cooked this much, but you can tell obviously just like a brisket, seasoning has set in there. It's not flaking off, still nice and moist. All right, let's go ahead, bring this in, and then we'll wrap it. All right, so I brought the tri-tip in. We're halfway through the cook. It just registered about 165. I forgot to mention that. So 2.5 hours, 250, here we are. I've got the pink butcher paper. I just buy the Reynolds one. It's got like a nice box with the slide cutter. You can use any brand of pink butcher paper, and we're gonna use some of that melted beef tallow. Now, if you don't have this, you may not get the same results because this is not as fatty as a brisket, and I definitely recommend using a little bit of this. So I didn't even use quite a quarter of a cup right there, just enough to kind of wet the sides, which is totally fine here. Just get the sides coated there. And look, the seasoning's on here. It didn't even unstick anything, which is great. So, and we're just gonna get this wrapped up nice and tight. So here, I'll shove it to the side here. And we just wanna make sure that the sides are sealed in. Not as important like with the brisket, when you have to wrap these, you're always worried about what's fat side up, what's fat side down. With the tri-tip, that it just doesn't have that issue. So I'm still gonna try to see if I can get top side facing top. You can tell I'm a pro at wrapping Christmas gifts. Yeah, right. So this was the top side, so I'm just gonna leave it on here. We'll get it back in the smoker. Smoker's still at 250. We're gonna go ahead and just set this in here. This is the top side, here's the fat side. We're gonna let this cook until it's about 200 degrees, but we're really looking for probe tenderness. So get your meat thermometer ready, and we'll come in back in about 90 minutes. All right, it's been another 90 minutes or so. I've tempted a couple times, sitting right around that 203 mark or so. And the most important thing is that it's pretty probe tender. So I'm gonna go ahead and take it off, we'll let it rest. So I brought the little guy in, it's pretty little. Brought the tri-tip in. It is resting right now. It's pretty warm, so I'm gonna let it hang out for about 30, 45 minutes. It doesn't need to sit for hours like a brisket. It just doesn't have all that intermuscular fat. So I'll let it hang out. You could put it in a cooler if you want, but you wanna let it cool for about 10 minutes so it stops cooking first, and then we'll slice it in. So I'll come back after the rest. All right, it's been about 40 minutes or so. I've let this rest. It feels nice and tender. So let's go ahead and reveal this tri-tip. Smoked brisket style. That is juicy. Ooh, look at that. Now, obviously, it's not as big as a brisket. However, we've got a tri-tip. It's gonna taste good. Let's slice into this. All right, let's just go right down the middle. We can do the meat squeeze, right? That's what we gotta do. All right, you guys can see that. That's actually pretty juicy. I'm pretty impressed. Now, what you don't see is like lots of fat dripping off of here. So, but you can see that you still get really nice, thin slices of tender meat. So you can see this meat, it's got really nice bounce to it still. It's not super leathery and tough like you might have imagined if you haven't tried this process before. So, I mean, it's pretty good. It just falls apart really easily too. You can tell that if you do this process, it still ends up being very tender, very similar to a brisket. Plus, you get a few of these little burnt ends on the end that don't really slice into anything, so that's cool. Not worth saucing and putting back on the smoker, but hey, chef's treat. So I think the big question is it worth it to make a tri-tip like a brisket? It's more expensive per pound, a lot more expensive per pound, but not everybody wants to spend 16 hours making a brisket. Plus, it is a lot leaner, and to be frank, it's way easier to make too. I will say that the flavor is very similar to a brisket flat, and I actually think that the fat on a tri-tip is much better than like a chuck roast. It doesn't have that weird intermuscular fat that's kind of chewy. Take that information however you want to. Just know that per pound, tri-tips can be a lot more expensive, but it's way faster. I hope this guide is helpful for you guys. Cheers, we'll see you next time.